Hola amiga, welcome to my channel. I'm Rosa. Thank you so much for joining. If you're new here, my channel is really focused around following my journey of self-acceptance and discovery. So if you want to follow along, definitely make sure to subscribe. So in today's video, I wanted to share about my spiritual journey. This is something that has been transformational for my growth. Because it allows me to ask for guidance, to connect with something bigger than myself, to check my ego, to help navigate a lot of transitions and big decisions in life, and to ultimately feel like something's got your back and you're able to rely on something bigger than yourself. And this wasn't always the case for me. So to kick things off, I wanted to share a little bit about my background. Before I jump into sharing my background and my journey, I just want to do a big notice that this is only my opinion and my experience. I have no judgment in terms of like what works best for you. I know religion's a very touchy subject, so I want to respect that. And I just want to say that this is what's worked for me and my path, my experience. So I absolutely respect your viewpoints and what works best for you. All right, so with that said, I grew up in a very Catholic, I would say, culture, being from Guatemala and, growing up in this very heavy Latino culture. As many of you, I'm sure, have experienced, is that Catholicism is something that is very present, not only in, of course, your spiritual kind of connection, religious practice, but also in just more of the day-to-day culture. So the way that we view certain behaviors or certain lifestyles come largely from the belief of Catholicism and what's like considered good and bad. Growing up from a very young age, I started going to church with my family, and this was, we were very involved in our local church here in LA. And we went to church every single Sunday from the age I was 5 until I was about 17, I want to say. So a big part of my life growing up, and I was very involved as well. So not only was I attending, I was part of the choir, I was part of other like clubs there, and I grew up with a lot of people around me that I became really good friends with that I met through church. So church played a very vital role for me, and something that really connected me to a community. It was also a beautiful routine to have with my parents and my brother every single Sunday, getting dressed, driving to church, eating after church, and just having that time with my family. So it was very special. But as I got older and I, of course, started to form an opinion of my own and something that felt intuitive to me, I started to notice a lot of things that I didn't like. For example, just the shaming and the guilting, and that is why there's that term, Catholic guilt. A lot of dogmatic beliefs that were very black and white, to be honest. And slowly, as I got older, I just started to strongly dislike this idea of like having to dictate how we live our life. And I understand from a grand scheme that it's important to give do's and don'ts to a community and a culture, but at the same time, it really invaded our day-to-day life and directed something to be good or bad. That's the other thing that I started noticing, is that everything is very black and white and there's just no in between. Eventually, as I got older, once I was about 17, I decided that I no longer wanted to do and go to church anymore because of how much shame it created in my life, and the people that I also respected, and different lifestyles that I respected, and a lot of the rights that I believed, for example, with birth control, or having a say and being able to dictate what happens in a woman's body, or being queer, etc. All of these things that I very much respected and that I very much supported were going against the Catholic belief. And so little by little, I decided that I was no longer going to be part of the church. I became very resentful, to be honest, in that it created a lot of shame for me and just like living life and being a human being. And something that I've noticed now is that Catholicism is super embedded in Latino culture. It's really in the ways that we shame and guilt people for not being perfect. And I honestly still notice these little traces sometimes in the way that I think or my self-talk or the way I might like moderate myself before I do a certain behavior. From the ages from about 17 to 29, I lived completely without any kind of religion or spiritual practice. I would even consider myself to have thought of myself as an atheist at the time, and was strongly repelled by even the idea or talk about spirituality. And it's only been a couple years since I've started my spiritual practice and journey. And I feel so much more content. I feel so much more serene, and I feel so much more at ease to be able to now explore this side of me that I had completely shut off for many years. 2 years ago, I had a huge event and transition in my life that made me turn towards spirituality and really forced me to have a connection to something bigger than myself. And the first thing that I did was realize and understand that religion and spirituality are two completely different things. You don't need to be religious in order to practice spirituality or to have a spiritual connection. And the way that I started was really with baby steps. And what I did was look for places that I felt connection to something bigger than myself. And for me, that was through nature. I remember, going on some backpacking trips and hikes where I would get to the top of the mountain. I'd look around, all around me, and there were beautiful trees, a blue sky, rocks and cliffs and canyons and formations, trees, of course, that had been there for millions of years. And that feeling just reminded me of how small I am and how much bigger and vaster this universe is. So what I did was to first seek out places where I felt that connection to something bigger than myself. Second thing that I did was to be curious. So I started looking into different spiritual practices and beliefs to kind of nitpick the things that made sense for me. So I actually started reading a ton around Buddhism and Zen practices. That was something that really spoke to me. I think yoga also has this like spiritual component to it, and meditation, of course, and all the various forms of meditations that are out there were so important in terms of really developing that spiritual connection for me. The other big thing that I came to realize is that a spiritual practice is something that is constantly evolving, constantly growing. Think about it almost like a relationship to maybe your partner or a parent or a best friend, and how that relationship is constantly changing and evolving, and you're learning something new and you're growing as a person, or you're coming across some new information about them, or they're changing in some way, and that relationship is a living thing. And I look at my spiritual journey and practice exactly like that. So what my spiritual practice looks like now, I believe in a higher power. I know that there is something bigger than myself out there, and sometimes I call that thing a higher power, sometimes I call it a universe. Additionally, I started praying again, and let me tell you, it was a very strange transition to go from, that Catholic praying and all the prayers that you memorize as a kid, which, by the way, I only know how to pray in Spanish, which I think is really funny. Now, my prayer looks very different. It looks more of like talking to the universe in some ways. And a lot of the times I'm asking for a lot of guidance. I'm asking for my universe to show me the way, especially when I'm trying to make a very, very difficult decision or something that's, impactful into my life. I also take the time in that prayer to express gratitude for the things that are present in my life. And let me tell you, after I leave that prayer, even if it's 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 10 minutes, I always feel so much better, because I am not only asking for that guidance and that help, but also then taking a moment to be in gratitude for what I already have. And I mean, there's so many studies out there that show that gratitude just helps so much with happiness. Another big thing that's so key to my spiritual practice is meditation. And I've tried a lot of different meditations, and the ones that I kind of stick to right now is sitting meditation. So just sitting in silence. That one's a little bit harder for me, but just sitting in silence and practicing, watching and observing and letting go of thoughts. The second one that I absolutely love, and this is definitely something that I practice a lot more, is called Yoga Nidra. It's basically like the yogi sleep. It's basically similar to a guided meditation, but with a lot more body scanning. I'll definitely make sure to link some of my favorite ones in the description, so check them out. Lastly, I remain super curious about spirituality and the ways in which I can continue to develop and grow this part of me. So like I previously said, I read a lot of books, I do a lot of research online and on YouTube, of course, to find just some various ways in which you can improve your practice. I also sought out a new church now that I attend that is local to LA. And the church that I'm part of is actually a lay-led church, and it is focused around social activism, which means that there is no religion or no dogmas in place. And it's filled with very like-minded people, which I think is so important in building, again, that spiritual connection and community. Community was something that I missed a lot from church, that I found so special growing up. And that as I think about growing my family, I really want them to be part of a spiritual community. Remaining curious, I strongly believe, is what will help find a new way of approaching spirituality and kind of dusting that off. I'm sure there are a lot of people like myself that have experienced a lot of religion kind of trauma. And there's no reason why we need to be robbed of a spiritual practice simply because of maybe the past or how we grew up and how religion may have impacted our beliefs. So I definitely encourage you to stay curious, whether it be about spirituality or anything else, and stay open to what might be out there and what other ways these other versions can exist in your life. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen and go through this with me. I wanted to also share just a few of my favorite meditations, so I linked them in the description if you want to check them out. Again, don't forget to subscribe to follow along my journey, and definitely reach out if you have any questions or any comments, feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Adios.